The clock is ticking until UFC 300, and it's safe to say it'll be a night full of very exciting matchups. From the first fight of the night to the last fight of the night, there are so many big names. And I feel like in general this year, we have been so spoiled with these stacked pay-per-view cards. Back in February, we got to see Merab earn his way into title contention, and then Ilya dethrone one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in Volkanovski, of course. UFC 299 is also still fresh on my mind as well. And in my opinion, it was even more exciting than UFC 298. Watching Poirier score that impressive knockout against Benoit St. Denis, and then Sean O'Malley defend his belt in such an impressive and dominant fashion. Now, on paper, UFC 300 is arguably way more stacked from top to bottom. I mean, Cody Garbrandt and Deiveson Figueiredo are the first early prelim, not just prelim, but early prelim of the night. And this fight, in my opinion, would be on the main card of almost any other UFC fight night. And that just goes to show how deep this card goes. And with that being said, let's dive into my thoughts and predictions for this card. Like I just mentioned, Cody Garbrandt and Figueiredo will be kicking off the action at UFC 300. They are the first fight on the early prelims, which is crazy considering just 2 fights ago, Figueiredo was fighting in a championship fight and is currently ranked number 8 in the bantamweight division. As we all know, Figueiredo is the former 125-pound champ. He did make the move up to bantamweight after coming up short in his 4th fight against Brandon Moreno. Now, his most recent fight and his first fight at 135 was against Rob Font, and in my opinion, proved that he was more than ready to make a run at bantamweight. Stylistically, Figueiredo is very well-rounded. His grappling is very high level, and I think because of his confidence in his grappling, he has no problem committing to any strikes that he throws on the feet. I feel like sometimes you'll see such high-level strikers who won't fully commit to their strikes just because of the fear or lack of interest in going to the ground, especially when facing a grappler. But as well-rounded as Figueiredo is, I do know that Cody is no easy task. Cody is known for his powerful boxing and knockout ability. Out of Cody's 14 professional wins, 11 of those come by knockout, which is really impressive. His movement and his agility is some of the highest of levels, in my opinion. Cody also has a very high-level wrestling ability, although I feel like we don't see him utilize it as often as he should. And because of his success on the feet and just his overall personality, Cody usually pulls himself and his opponent into a brawl. Unfortunately for Cody, back in 2019, the brawling possibly caught up with him. As we know, Cody's Achilles heel is his chin. He's somewhat of a glass cannon. If you go on YouTube, you can find a highlight reel of all of his knockouts, but I feel like you can also see a reel of him getting knocked out as well. I don't think his finishes come because of a lack of defense on his part, though. I genuinely think he has some of the best head movement and movement in general in the bantamweight division, and it's been on display for so many fights, and it really shines against Dominic Cruz. All fighters have physical attributes or limitations, I guess you could say, and Cody's happens to be his chin. It's not something you can always control, but I will say it seems like he has really been addressing it, and he's been absorbing a lot less strikes, so let's hope that he continues to trend in that direction. Figueiredo is a very powerful fighter. He hits hard, he kicks hard, he jumps on guillotines hard. He's not afraid to use every single tool in his toolbox, which is something that might cause a little trouble for Cody. As far as individual aspects like power, like in the striking department, I think I would give Garbrandt the edge, but if you do watch Figueiredo, you can't tell me that he doesn't hit hard. I don't think pulling Figueiredo into a firefight would be the best idea for Cody. I really hope to see a calm and collected version of Cody Garbrandt in this fight. I think he has some of the best and most impressive boxing in the division, and as long as he keeps his emotions under control, I see him having great success. I don't think Figueiredo is going to be looking for a straight boxing match, though. I see Figueiredo mixing everything together and putting the pressure on. If Cody overcommits at any point in his striking, Figueiredo could definitely take advantage of that. Even though Figueiredo is coming up from flyweight, I don't see size being an issue here at all for him. Cody actually himself has fought at 125 before, and he didn't really have too much success down at 125. So in my opinion, there's not much to talk about in the physical size-up department. I've enjoyed watching both of these fighters throughout their careers, and this time will be no different. If I did have to pick a winner, I would give the overall edge to Figueiredo. I think his willingness and confidence in using every sharp tool in his toolbox will help him walk away with the win. But either way, it's such a crazy good fight to be starting off the early prelims. The next fight on the card is Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. Between both of these fighters, the amount of not only experience, but UFC experience is so astonishing. Jim Miller himself has 54 pro fights under his belt. I believe he made his UFC debut back in 2008. Miller has fought everyone from Frankie Edgar to Cowboy Cerrone, Charles Oliveira, Poirier, and so many crazy opponents. And out of 37 of his career wins, 27 of those are finishes. He has knockout wins and submission wins under his belt, but in my opinion, what he's most known for is just being exciting and entertaining. Whether the fight is on the ground or the feet, Miller is always hunting for a finish, and he's definitely not picky. As much of a wild card as Miller is, though, I think if anyone's going to give him a challenge on that, it's going to be Bobby Green. Half of Green's professional wins have been via finish. Stylistically, I think this is the fight the fans want to see. Both fighters have knockout power, but are also well-rounded enough to snag a submission win. But one thing I would say that does stand out to me is how Green likes to keep his hands very low. Now, he does try to bring them up when his opponent throws something, but this is a very dangerous game to play. I think we definitely saw this in his most recent fight against Jalen Turner. Green got caught with the right hand, which ultimately ended in a knockout. But I also remember like a similar blueprint and outcome when he fought Dustin Poirier. So when fighting someone like Jim Miller, I'm not sure taking the same exact approach would be a recipe for success. Not only does Miller have knockout power, but he has one punch knockout power. And I think if Green plays that game, it only takes one. So if I'm being honest, this fight could go either way. Both fighters have, you know, the experience, the power, the versatility, the ability to finish each other. But I think I'm going to lean towards Miller. I think Green has the super slight edge in youth maybe, but him keeping his hands down is a trend that is very consistent in every fight. And I see Miller possibly catching him within the 3 rounds. But I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. Moving on to the women's strawweight division. Jessica Andrade and Marina Rodriguez are 2 of the highest level strawweights at the moment. They are both ranked number 4 and number 6, and obviously are both looking to take one step closer to challenging for the title. Stylistically, these women are very different. Straight up, Andrade is a tank. Her last fight was against Mackenzie Dern. She did score a very impressive knockout in that fight. But before that, she did lose 3 in a row. She went up to 125 pounds to fight Erin Blanchfield, came back down. She fought Jan, who is now fighting Wei Li for the belt the same night. And then she fought Tatiana Suarez. All 3 were via finish. I do think Andrade has the potential to be a powerhouse, but once she builds that forward momentum, sometimes she can get a little overzealous and she exposes her own holes in her game, in my opinion. Her last 3 losses were definitely all against very high level and respected opponents. But all of her opponents were a lot more patient and technical with their approaches as well. And that's why they had success. I love watching Andrade find success with her power, whether it's on the feet or takedowns or overall ground game. So I really do hope to see a more composed and technical version of her. Speaking of technical, I feel like that might be the perfect word to describe Rodriguez. Rodriguez is definitely going to have the height and reach on Andrade, which will only help her already long striking style. Marina has such a high level and impressive clinch game, and that really stands out to me. Once she secures that tie plum, she does such a good job of throwing knees to the body, elbows over the top. I love how she doesn't force her entry into the tie clinch, and when she breaks off of the tie clinch, it's very clean and very nice. If anyone is going to test that clinch, I do think it will be Andrade. Obviously, I'm not Jessica, and I don't know what her game plan is. However, if I was Jessica, my game plan would be to get past that length and get it to the ground. As tough and high level as her clinch game is, Marina's holes in her grappling game have been exposed a few times. We saw this in her fight against Verna. Marina looked great in that fight, don't get me wrong, but Verna was able to control Marina on the ground just enough to, beat her. If Andrade can get past the length and, clinch game of Marina, I think she can have the same success on the ground. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if Andrade doesn't strategically and safely get on the inside, I think Marina can very well control most of the fight and rack up points on the outside and in the clinch. Both of these strawweights have fought the challenger Jan, which, like I said, Jan is fighting Wei Li for the 115-pound title that same night. Marina was able to score a split decision win back in 2022 over Jan. Andrade's fight didn't go quite as well. About a year ago, actually, Jan knocked out Andrade in the first round. Andrade unfortunately had the same fate when she fought the strawweight champion at the time right now, Wei Li. But either way, both of these women will be fighting towards another shot at the title, and I'm sure they'll both be watching the co-main event very closely. Ultimately, I really hope to see Andrade ride off her last win. I think she has a good chance of winning if she can get it to the ground. Next, in the lightweight division, we have number 10 ranked Jalen Turner taking on number 13 ranked Renato Moicano. Right off the bat, Jalen's reach stands out. I think it's easy for people to blame Jalen's success on his height advantage, but I think credit needs to be given where credit is due. Just because you have a tool doesn't mean you know how to use it. There are many fighters who have had these same height, or reach advantages who haven't had the same successes. He lands the head kicks. His timing's great. He's precise and he has really good reads. He is, however, coming off 2 back-to-back split decision losses against Dan Hooker and Mateusz Gamrot. Split decision losses always suck. The way I look at it, you are one different judge away from walking away a winner. And to have that back-to-back has to be frustrating. Nonetheless, Jalen was able to turn the tide after an impressive knockout over Bobby Green in his last outing. And there's no doubt that he's hoping to build off of that momentum when fighting Moicano. One of, interesting fact about Jalen is out of 14 of his professional wins, all 14 have been finishes, most coming via knockout. I do think his body type and style serves him very well in the 155-pound division. Moicano is well-seasoned and has a plethora of submission wins, though. His transitions are slick, and once he secures those positions, he is immediately looking for a submission. It is very clear to me that this would be the safest and most effective route to victory for Moicano. At least that's my opinion. But I know that he has the edge on the ground, but I do worry about his process in getting there. As good as his jiu-jitsu and ground game may be, I don't see solid wrestling or, takedown base. Sometimes when Moicano is closing the distance in an effort to shoot a takedown, he does have the tendency to reach and have a lack of setup. Against someone with the length, power, and, finishing instinct like Turner, that gateway from the feet to the ground has to be sharp. Maybe we'll see him try to chop down the leg of Jalen in an effort to limit movement. However, due to Jalen's length, he may have to be prepared for some really quick counters. On the chance he does get Jalen to the ground, I still don't see him submitting Jalen. He's fought Gamrot, who is, in my opinion, a better overall grappler than Moicano, and he was able to escape submission or finish territory. Overall, I see Jalen being able to find a path to victory in most cases within these 3 rounds. Let's get into Diego Lopez and Sodiq Yusuff. This fight will take place in the 145-pound division. I believe this will be Diego's 4th UFC fight. He did lose his UFC debut, but since then, he is able to score back-to-back exciting finishes. Yusuff will definitely be Diego's most seasoned opponent to date. Yusuff has been with the UFC since about 2018, I believe, and since then, he's fought some very high-level opponents. In this most recent fight, he did fight Edson Barboza last October. He did lose via decision, but I will add that he looked really good in it, and he had Barboza in some trouble, especially in the first round. His persistent forward pressure and heavy hands usually finds him a lot of success. He combos up so well and does a good job of staying in his shell and keeping his hands up and staying safe while he's throwing these heavy combos. Yusuff is a very consistent and level-headed fighter. Now, Diego Lopez is fairly new to the UFC, but he has shown some promise. He fights with purpose and heart and is not afraid to risk it all, and most of the time, having a style like that will result in a highlight reel. However, sometimes it can land you on the wrong side of the highlight reel if you understand what I'm saying. Diego does have the tendency to eat shots on the feet, and I'm not sure Yusuff is a type of guy you want to just be doing that with. I could see Diego getting hit and getting a little frustrated and going a little wild, and sometimes that works really well, but the higher level you get, the less you can get away with recklessly doing things like that. I will say if this fight gets to the ground, I have Lopez finding a submission. He's very creative and fast on the ground, and that's really where he shines. I just wonder if he'll be able to get past the composed and dangerous fighter in Yusuff. This fight gives me very vet versus newcomer vibes, and I'm wondering if the young buck will win or if the experienced, more poised fighter will be kind of sort of teaching a lesson. But either way, I see this being a very exciting matchup, and I feel like it's getting overlooked in my opinion. Kayla Harrison will be making her highly anticipated UFC debut against Holly Holm at UFC 300. Harrison is 16-1 as a professional MMA fighter. However, before that, she was a well-established judoka Olympian and world champion. She has spent most of her MMA career at 155 pounds, but she did have 145 matchup against Courtney King at an Invicta event back in 2020. This fight against Holly will be at bantamweight. I've seen many people, speculating if Harrison can get down to 135. That's just something like we're going to have to wait and see. I don't see, a point in talking about it. Harrison's only loss in her pro career has been to Larissa Pachenko. Pachenko is a staple and a force in the PFL women's lightweight division and is no slouch to lose to. Harrison's last fight was back in November, and she scored a decision win over UFC veteran Aspen Ladd, a familiar name to a lot of the OG UFC watchers. So Kayla has had some decent experience when it comes to, caliber opponents. However, fighting Holm is a whole different ballgame. Not only is Holly herself a high caliber opponent, she also has like a plethora of high level experience herself. We all know Holly rose to fame after knocking out the legend herself, Ronda, and I'll touch on that in a few. But she's also been in the cage with Raquel Pennington, who is the current 135 champ, Amanda Nunes, Chris Cyborg, Valentina, Irene Aldana, Miesha Tate. Like, I can go on and on. So the experience between the two is definitely quite different. But, you know, everyone does have to start somewhere. PFL has, recently spearheaded the women's 55-pound division and opening up opportunities for the best 45 and 55-pounders on the planet. However, when it comes to UFC caliber experience, no one can really compare. And like I said before, fighting people like Nunes and Cyborg and Valentina is crazy. You can't compare or replicate that in any way. Holly Holm has been a staple of the 135-pound division and the short-lived 45-pound division in the UFC for so many years. And if I'm Harrison, there's no other person I want to potentially make a statement in my UFC with. I like Harrison. She's a strong-minded, outspoken woman, and she has a very high-level, fundamentally sound background. I'd like to see her have success in the UFC, but this fight, it's very tough to say exactly how it'll go. Now, in no way do I want to compare Ronda and Harrison. But I can't help to feel some kind of familiarity or deja vu with Harrison versus Holm. Both Ronda and Kayla have impressive Olympic judoka backgrounds and both have very bold personalities and fighting styles. Even though it wasn't too long ago that Ronda was not only reigning the 135-pound division, but was the face of women's MMA. And women's MMA has evolved an immense amount since then. Ronda began her UFC tear in 2013, and less than a decade later, the women's divisions, plural now, are unrecognizable. Side note, but I also do think that too many people discredit Rousey for the path she paved for women's MMA. She's the perfect example of no matter what you do or what you accomplish, you'll never fully satisfy, the MMA fans' standard. She single-handedly changed hundreds, if not thousands of women's and future women's lives. And people still have, bad things to say. And I don't know, I just like to stick up for the women and just people in general who inspired me and so many others. And regardless of losses or the way careers ended, I think people deserve the respect and recognition that they have earned. Anyways, I'm going to end that tangent there. This fight can't help but, give me Ronda versus Holm-esque vibes. Judoka Olympian takes on tough and technical boxer and kickboxer. So let's dive into Holly right now. Holly, like I said, is very technical. She shines defensively, and a fighter like Ronda Rousey, who is overly aggressive, is the perfect opponent for her. Holly is also not afraid to be very patient. Out of all of Holly's wins, 8 of 15 have come via KO, and the other 7 have been decisions. Holm is either capitalizing on your mistakes and kicking you and knocking you out, or she's picking you apart and staying very patient the whole fight. Much like Rousey versus Holm, Harrison versus Holm is quite similar. Harrison obviously has the edge on the ground, and if the fight ends up there, I have faith that Kayla can find a way to victory. However, the way I see this fight going is Holm coming out on top. She's not afraid to be overly patient and has a very big edge in the boxing or kickboxing department. The way I see this fight going, and this is just my opinion, but is Kayla trying to close the distance, but Holly being very smart in maintaining that distance, therefore feeding into Holly's world and successful striking, defensively. But either way, I'm very excited to wait and see how this fight plays out. For our next fight, we are back in the featherweight division. Calvin Kattar will be welcoming Aljamain Sterling into the featherweight division. So I know Aljo is coming up a weight class, but honestly, I don't see him struggling too much size-wise. He's always been very solid at 135, and without having to make that cut to 135 and being able to bulk up, I see him being just as solid at 145. As we know, he is primarily a grappler, and he specializes in wrestling. He has a very funky style, hence his nickname, the Funk Master, I guess. He's very long and lanky, and I think with that body style and type that he'll do really well at 145. He obviously has a very impressive track record at bantamweight with wins over Henry Cejudo and TJ and Corey Sandhagen and, many more. But more times than not, he's been able to find a submission or ride out a technical and gritty decision. The biggest hurdle I see Aljo having to deal with is the power behind Calvin Kattar's striking. He combos up very well and packs a lot of power in pretty much every strike he throws. I do, however, notice that he tends to overcommit to his strikes, and with a high-level wrestler like Aljo, that could be dangerous. I don't necessarily see Aljo out-strengthening Kattar. He's a very solid featherweight, but you don't always need to go strength for strength or be stronger than your opponent. I can see Aljo being tricky and setting some traps to pull Kattar, into his world. And if you know how to do that, it's arguably physically easier when you can outsmart your opponent and not expend all that energy trying to physically outmuscle each other, especially if it's his first time up at 145 and he's trying to feel that weight and strength adjustment out. Calvin Kattar has fought high caliber opponents for a long time now. He's actually 1-3 in his last 4 coming into this matchup, though. He's always performed well, but here and there he can come up short against the higher level opponents. I am hoping to see more of an improved version of him this fight. Beating someone like Aljo is a very nice thing to add to your resume, regardless if Aljo is coming up from 135 or not. I'm sure after his last couple of fights, Calvin is coming into this matchup as determined as ever. And with that, I expect the sharpest and most prepared version of himself as well. As well as I hope to see that. Going off the facts and what we've seen from Calvin, I do think Aljo will be victorious in his featherweight debut. I see Aljo being able to evade most dangers on the feet and being able to get it to the ground. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy for Aljo or that Aljo won't absorb any shots, but I do think within the 15 minutes, Aljo will be able to add up enough control time to win. But it is also his first fight at 145, so this is new waters for him. But I don't know. I'm sure Calvin's going to do everything he can to keep, 145 territory his own. But I'm going to go with Aljo. Closing out the prelims, we have Yuri and Alexander Rakic. Don't come at me for saying his name wrong. I probably said it wrong. Okay, this is in the light heavyweight division. The pure power between both of these athletes is just kind of scary. Whenever I hear of Yuri, I think of the video where he's just screaming on the edge of a mountain, and I'm reminded how truly insane he is, in the best ways possible, of course. I'm expecting nothing short of fireworks, from start to finish, and no matter how long or short this fight will be. With that being said, I don't see this fight lasting 15 minutes. Yuri is just short of 30 wins on his pro record, and only one has went the distance, and that was back in Risen years ago. Alexander has 14 wins to his name, and 10 of those have been via finish, so I think it's safe to say we're most likely going to see a finish. Yuri has been a bit more active than Alexander, however. Both fight about once a year. If I'm being honest, I don't have too many thoughts on this fight. In my opinion, Yuri is on a slightly higher level than Alexander, but I do think both of these fighters are going to go for broke. Alexander has shown to be successful defensively striking and scoring, on openings his opponents give him. But on the flip, Yuri has really great movement. He's unorthodox, and he always keeps you on your toes. I see him having the edge in fight IQ and experience and be able to score a win on April 13th. Opening up the main card, we have decorated wrestler Bo Nickal fighting Cody Brundage. Nickal has been quite the controversy since making his way into the UFC. Many people, have had some words to say about him being on the main card with so many other insane matchups on the prelims and, even the early prelims like we talked about earlier. Although I do understand some of the discord, I do think Nickal has a lot of potential in the UFC. For some context, he is a 3-time NCAA Division I champion. He was 120-3 in his wrestling career and did end his wrestling career on a 68-match winning streak. Wrestling is one of the most physically and mentally demanding sports and goes so deep with talent, hard work, and overall grit. To have these kind of accomplishments under your belt in one of the hardest sports in the world is more than impressive. And I'm very excited to watch his progression in MMA. I feel like a lot of people feel like the UFC jumped the gun, so to speak, with his treatment and placement. But like the UFC, I too see the potential and understand wanting to snag him and make him a staple of your organization early on. Nickal is only 5-0 currently as a pro and is coming off a win over Jamie Pickett and Val Woodburn. I agree. The UFC is taking more of a slow build approach to Bo Nickal, and a lot of people claim that it's unfair, but there are a couple ways you can look at this. As a pro fighter who has fought at all levels of the sport, including the UFC, everyone's path to the top is different. Most people have to take the homegrown MMA route. You come up on the local amateur and pro scene, and you get picked up by a slightly higher level organization for a while until hopefully the UFC comes knocking. And a lot of times fighters who have dedicated their lives to the sport and are extremely skilled, never do get that call because it is such a hard gauntlet to get through. And the right eyes have to see you. However, there are rare individuals like Bo Nickal, who, like I said, is only 5-0 as a pro in MMA. He doesn't have that same ladder to climb, but definitely hasn't been handed anything. I just listed all of Bo's accolades at the highest level of wrestling, which is arguably the most gritty, mentally, and physically challenging martial art out of all the martial arts. We've seen other athletes succeed in specialty martial arts and transition over with the same treatment as well. Alex Pereira being one of them. Alex Pereira dominated in kickboxing and then came into the UFC, and then within 1 or 2 MMA fights under his belt. And after a few fights, he was at the top of his division and being crowned champion. Will Bo have that same fate? I have no idea. Only time will tell. But I do think we have to give him a couple fights to prove that. And I do hope to see the caliber of opponents he faces get tougher and tougher, of course. Now that I gave that long-ass intro, Cody Brundage will be looking to derail the Bo hype train. Cody has had a lot more MMA experience coming into this matchup. He is 10-5 as a pro, and he's coming off back-to-back wins over Zach Reese and Jacob Malcone, something like that. In his most recent fight, if I'm not mistaken, he slammed his opponent and actually knocked him out in the process. I'm not sure he'll be doing the same thing against Bo, but it does go to show his pure strength and brute force. Cody has a lot of power in his hands, whether they're on the feet or ground and pound. I do notice Cody does try to wrestle a lot in his fights, and it makes me wonder if wrestling Bo Nickal toe-to-toe is like the challenge he's looking for, or if he's going to, try to keep it on the feet and keep Bo in his less acquainted world, so to speak. If I'm being honest, though, I don't think Cody's going to have a choice when it comes to wrestling Bo. Like I said, Cody does have more MMA experience, but stopping the takedowns of someone like Bo Nickal is far from easy, and ultimately I do see Bo being able to control or finish his way to victory. Like I mentioned before, I do hope to see Bo take a leap up in competition soon, because I would love to see how fast he can evolve or adapt, to the fighters at the top of his division. I personally think he has, some of the best wrestling in the division, especially wrestling, but MMA is so much more than just that, so we'll have to wait and see how he evolves. Now, this is one of those fights where I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen. The fight in question is Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. I am and always have been a very big fan of Oliveira. He's just so exciting and unpredictable. We've watched him dominate, but we've also watched him, leave his heart in the cage and come back and win a fight we thought he was out of. And I think one of the most admirable traits a fighter can have is heart. And in my opinion, Charles is definitely at the top of that list. With that being said, Arman is no easy task. As we know, he's a very high-level grappler. His only UFC losses are to Mateusz Garbrandt and Islam Makhachev, who are two of the most high-level, authentic grapplers in the division. His most recent win was over Beneil Dariush. I believe both of their most recent wins was over Beneil Dariush. But Beneil is a very experienced and skilled fighter, and more specifically, skilled grappler. So Arman is no stranger to fighting someone with creative submission and transition ability on the ground. Something that is in Charles' favor, though, is he is very unique. He's one of one, so Arman has never fought anyone like Oliveira. Like Arman, Charles also has one loss to Islam under his belt. Although before that loss, the last time Charles lost a fight was back in 2017, which is super impressive. Any and all of Charles' losses have always been to extremely notable fighters as well. Obviously, Islam being one, like I said, but, Max Holloway and Cerrone and Frankie Edgar, more talented names are on that list. I also think, and, I think other people would also agree that when Charles fought Islam and lost, he just, wasn't himself. Every fighter has those days, whether it's just a day of training where you don't feel like yourself, but sometimes, unfortunately, on the big stage, you have those days. And I'd like to think that a second fight between Islam and Oliveira would be very different. Regardless of the outcome, just performance-wise, I would like to think it would be very different. Stylistically, I think this is a very interesting matchup. Arman is a very high-level grappler who is very strategic and very smart. Basically, he uses his striking just enough to get the fight where he wants, which is on the ground. Charles, on the other hand, is a wild card. He comes at you from all angles. He has a nasty clinch. He's very creative in there as well. It looks awful to deal with, if I'm being honest. You really have no idea what he's going to throw at you. He's not afraid to take risks and look for a finish. He also has an edge in the opponent department, in my opinion. Obviously, Arman has faced top-level opponents, but Charles has been fighting nothing but insanely high-level opponents for well over a decade now. And all of these fighters have all had different weapons and skill sets and approaches, and Charles has shown heart and success against the majority of these matchups. He's always shown resilience and heart in all these fights, and like I said, you can't count him out at any point, and this fight is no different. No matter what the outcome, Charles has the ability to win from the first second to the last. And that's why it's so hard picking a winner for this fight. You know, Oliveira's go for broke mentality is one of his strong suits as a fighter, but it can also be a fatal flaw with someone as calm and calculated as Arman. I see Arman trying to be patient and look for any openings to find a fit in and take him down. As much as I want Oliveira to win, the stylistic matchup is making me a little nervous. It's giving me slight PTSD from the Islam Oliveira fight. I'm really interested to hear, too, what you guys think about this matchup and who you think is going to win. And not who you want to win, but who you think actually will win. My heart will always say Oliveira, and my head isn't necessarily saying Arman, but I think it might be leaning that way. Next up, we have the People's main event. It's the main event, in my opinion, and happens to be the BMF title. You know, some people like the BMF title, and some people think it's stupid. It was a cool idea when it came out. Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal kind of spearheaded the idea of, you know, getting credited for being, you know, scrappers and down to fight anyone, anywhere, under most circumstances. And whether you're a fan of it or not, it has always produced super entertaining matchups and fights. As far as the actual matchup goes, we have Max Holloway coming up to lightweight to face Justin Gaethje. Now, Max has spent most, if not all, of his career at 145. He does have over 30 pro fights, though, so I could be wrong. But either way, it's been a long time since we've seen him at 155, if at all. It'll be interesting to see how he performs there. From the stuff he's posting on social media and the way he looks like he'll be pretty well adjusted to the new weight class. And given he's cleaned out the majority of the featherweight division, aside from Volk, I think he has enough skill to fight at whichever weight class he chooses. Volk obviously had, the 3 wins over Max, which I'm sure played a part in his decision to move up. And when Max did decide to do so, Volk and Ilya hadn't had their fight at UFC 298 yet. With Ilya now being the featherweight champ, it'll be interesting to see if Max decides to stay here at 55 or if he decides to move back down and pursue that matchup with Ilya. But we're just getting a bit ahead of ourselves, I guess. Max Holloway is coming off of 2 wins in the 45-pound division against Korean Zombie and Arnold Allen. And both of these fighters are very well-established names, but Justin Gaethje is a different animal. Gaethje is also riding a 2-fight win streak coming into this fight. They're both against 2 arguably higher-skilled opponents, being Rafael Fiziev and then Dustin Poirier. Honestly, what stands out to me the most about Justin, though, is his ability to finish so many opponents consistently. A little fun fact, 21 of his 25 wins are all by finish. So very impressive to say the least. Stylistically, I think we all know this is going to be a slugfest. We all know Justin has some high-level wrestling. Although he chooses to not use it offensively, we have seen it shine through in his defensive wrestling and scrambles, like back when he fought Michael Chandler. I think if he chooses to utilize that offensive wrestling ability, it could change the dynamic of this fight. But I think I remember Justin saying word for word, there, I got a takedown. You can stop asking. So never say never, but I think we can, throw away the possibility of any takedown attempts and throw them out the window. And to be quite honest, I'm not mad at it. These are a couple of my favorite fighters, and there's a good chance that this fight is one of the most entertaining fights of the card and, maybe even of the year. Obviously, Max Holloway is known for his high-level striking and just being a dog. I feel like there's a lot I could say about both of their mentalities, which is why I'm guessing they're fighting for the BMF belt. They're athletes and there's fighters, and these are both fighters. And like I said before, the majority of Justin Gaethje's wins are knockouts. But interestingly enough, not only has Max Holloway never been knocked out, he's actually only ever been finished 1 time, and that was back in 2012 when he was choked out by Dustin Poirier. On the flip side, a good majority of Holloway's wins are by decision, and Gaethje has never lost a fight via decision. So MMA math is funny, and this could all mean absolutely nothing, but I think it's a really interesting take to think about when trying to make a prediction. I really like both of these fighters, and I wish they could both win. We're lucky just to be getting this fight, but for my official prediction, and probably why most of you are here on this video, I do think Justin Gaethje will probably walk away the winner. It was a hard decision, but my only reason for choosing Gaethje is that while Max Holloway is a very dangerous striker with a high output offense, he does also have a tendency to absorb a lot of significant strikes. He actually has the record for most strikes absorbed in the organization at 2,086, and I think with Max moving up a weight class and taking on such a powerful striker with the finishing ability, it's not a favorable equation. Do I think Gaethje is going to knock Max out? Probably not. Maybe we'll see ref stoppage, but I think it'll probably go the distance. Max is known for having a really solid chin, and I would expect it to still hold up here at 155. But there you have it. My official prediction is Justin Gaethje by decision. In the co-main event, we have Wei Li defending her belt against Yan Xiaonan. Both of these strawweights have been a staple of the division for a long time now, both coming by way of China. It's been really cool seeing the evolution of Wei Li throughout the years. Of course, she's always been a standout talent, but every fight I feel like we see a different part of her game, new and improved, especially in her wrestling. I feel like she really showcases these improvements in her second fight with Rose, one of her fights with Joanna, and then even Carla. Obviously, with Carla, Wei Li wasn't offensively grappling, but her ability to reverse position and scramble and succeed against such a seasoned wrestler in Carla was very impressive. I know she started working with Henry Cejudo a while ago, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons she has improved so much. When learning from an Olympian that also has the MMA success that Henry Cejudo has, it's a recipe for success. But what that also tells me about Wei Li is she is very coachable. As successful and seasoned as Wei Li is, she is still a sponge, and that's the key to, progressing. It's one thing to learn something, but it's another to apply it and use it in real time under the lights at the highest level. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've been able to see Wei Li progress and not be stagnant, in the strawweight division. Now, we all know that Rose was Wei Li's toughest opponent. She was 0-2 against her. That first loss being the head kick that, Rose beautifully executed. But the second fight was a much closer fight, and we got to see Wei Li shine, even though she did ultimately lose that fight. Obviously, Wei Li did find her way back to the belt after submitting Carla Esparza after that impressive performance in all departments. And now here we are with her taking on Yan Xiaonan. Yan was the first female Chinese fighter ever signed by the UFC back in 2017. She made her UFC debut against Kylan Curran. Interesting enough, I actually helped Kylan Curran prepare for that fight. I was a young and up-and-coming 17-year-old and was more than excited to, get to experience and be a part of a training camp for a UFC fight. It was a very exciting fight between the two, and Yan did ultimately win via unanimous decision. Yan has fought the top of the division, but I do think Wei Li will be her toughest fight today. I also think stylistically this fight heavily favors Wei Li. And what stands out to me is the Yan-Carla Esparza fight. I know this fight was a couple years back, so I'm sure Yan has improved. But back then, Yan had a lot of trouble with the wrestling and grappling of Carla, and Carla was actually able to finish Yan in the second round. And just seeing how well Wei Li handled Carla, almost effortlessly in the grappling, I just feel like there's a clear-cut path to victory here for Wei Li. I've said it once and I'll say it again. MMA math doesn't always make sense or even work out that way, but with everything I've seen out of both of these athletes, it's hard to ignore some of these facts. And with that being said, in no way am I trying to discredit Yan. She's an aggressive, heavy hitter. We most recently saw proof of this when she knocked out Jessica Andrade. She did come out a lot more composed and patient looking in that fight, and, in my opinion, was able to catch Andrade as Andrade was kind of recklessly chasing forward, and we talked about that earlier in the video. Yan is really good at that. I've seen her moving backwards and kind of nonchalantly evade and then plant and fire something, really hard. And she does that quite a few times throughout her fights. However, Wei Li's fight IQ is on a different level, so I'm not sure something like that will bait Wei Li in. Ultimately, I do think Wei Li is on a different level. On the feet, Wei Li has better movement, especially in her head movement department. She moves her head in feints, and she splits and slips punches really well and is able to make really good reads during those head movements. And as powerful as Yan is, though, I do notice her head is on the line a lot. She has a very tall stance, and I'm wondering if that will cause any issues there. I do want to go back on what I said a little earlier about the path to victory, though, and to say, even if I do think Wei Li has the edge on the feet, when two high-level strikers who both possess knockout power are trading, sometimes it's hard to say who's going to take, who's going to win that battle. It only takes one strike to completely change the momentum or even the outcome of a fight. So standing there and trading when you have a very distinct advantage in another area seems a little silly. I think if Wei Li strikes a little and then finds her fit-ins and gets those takedowns, it'll be an early night for the champ. Wei Li's takedowns and overall grappling instincts and IQ really put her ahead of the game in this matchup, but that's only if she chooses to implement them, of course. Either way, I think this will be an exciting fight. For my final thoughts, I do see Wei Li being able to finish on within the 25 minutes, especially if she goes that wrestling route. I think she's also more than capable of winning if it stays on the feet, but it's more of a gamble for sure. If I had to put money on someone, though, I would put my money on Wei Li. Ending the night with a bang, we have Alex Pereira and Jamal Hill fighting for the light heavyweight title. Jamal Hill had to vacate his belt last year due to an injury and will now be trying to get his belt back. Hill only has one blemish on his pro record coming into this fight. He has climbed his way to the top of the division and has some very impressive finishes along the way. The main thing that stands out is his knockout power, and not only that, but his one-punch knockout power. What also helps him with this is the fact that he doesn't only headhunt. He does a really good job of mixing it up and going to the head, going to the body, changing levels with the strikes. Another thing I find interesting is his cadence in between his striking. It's very unique, and he keeps a very steady pressure, but like in between each punch, there's just like slightly more time than most people have. And it looks like it can be a little weird and tricky to read. So when you pair that with like a knockout ability, he makes for a very dangerous opponent. However, I do think Pereira is by far his toughest opponent today. Once Pereira was on UFC soil, he quickly and impressively earned his way to title contention. It took him only 7 fights to become a 2-division champion. And when you pair that with his accomplishments and experience in an entirely different sport, it's actually insane. His only UFC loss, as we know, was to Israel Adesanya when he got caught. And at that time he already had a couple wins over Israel in not only MMA but kickboxing as well. To this day, Pereira is the only person to ever finish Israel Adesanya in both sports. Both Pereira and Jamal Hill have, very long striking styles. And I don't see this fight going to the ground at all unless someone gets knocked out. But one of the biggest differences I see between the two is speed. Pereira is very good at landing and getting out of dodge. And although he has a very long style, he's also very good at throwing those short shots when that distance is closed. Pereira moves and throws with so much speed and confidence and accuracy, and I think this could be the deciding factor between the two. The most obvious flaw, I guess you could call it, in Pereira's game was exploited against Israel Adesanya. You can tell he kind of smelled blood and got a little too excited and left some holes open, and, it happens to the best of them, and against someone with the power of Hill, you're going to have to be very careful. As long as Pereira keeps those holes nice and closed, I can see him being able to walk away a champion. But, I do feel like the higher you go in the weight class, and power-wise, the harder it is to predict these outcomes. One punch throughout 25 minutes is all it could take. You could be dominating for 24 minutes and 50 seconds, and someone with the power of Hill can still get his hand raised. But, that's what makes it so excited. Let me know who you have walking away the 205 champ, but I think I'm going with Alex Pereira. I can't express how excited I am for this card to play out. The MMA fan in me is going crazy. From early prelim to main event, there are no bathroom or refill breaks on this card, so make sure you have everything handy. This year, like I said, we've been so spoiled with, 298, 299, and even some of the little fight cards in between. Either way, I really hope this momentum carries on. Let me know your picks for UFC 300 and, what you think of my picks. And, I don't know. I think it's going to be a really exciting night of fights. And as always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow my personal pages and the podcast page. They will all be linked below, but I will talk to you guys soon.